Please speak up.
We're not, okay.
Please.
When I explained to you what goes on about sewage, this is give you my experience with building sewage systems in the term. I have nothing against it. If we can get the funding for it, that's great. But in the past, when I explained things to you, it wasn't to put the sewage down, it was to elaborate on what goes on. Now, TJ, you've heard me, you work for banks, and I'm not an engineer. You want to explain the sewage process to Mrs. Colbert?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it a number of times now at a couple different public meetings, but there's.
Let me just say one other thing.
Sure.
I know that the H2O, or whatever it was, H2O I thought it was called.
Yeah.
It was like 2.6 something million that, and I don't think it's been, nobody went for that grant.
Yeah, I have an email, December 21st of Harshman, finalized the H2O grant last year.
But it wasn't,
We never got it.
no, but
we
did you
didn't
apply
stop-
for it?
Yeah, so here's Harshman's email stating that he finalized and we applied for
Oh,
December
okay,
21st.
but didn't you have to have that second part of the, what was it? Yeah, the permit in before you could apply for that?
You have to have your, that's sort of where I was going
Okay,
with mine.
all right.
There's, as Dennis alluded to, a number of steps with
Right.
implementing a
I
sewage facility
understand.
project. And there's the planning phase, which is the
I
Act
understand.
537 phase, which was completed in 2019 and approved in 2020. And then, once you have your Act 537 plan completed, you move then into the permitting phase, which we've talked about. There's essentially two main permits that you get to implement a sewage project: the NPDES Part 1 permit and the Water Quality Management Part 2 permit. Yes, and in July of 2022, the consulting engineer at the time applied for the Part 1 permit, the NPDES permit, and DEP asked the question of the township. They asked for the status of the submission of the Part 2 permit, the Water Quality Management Part 2 permit. DEP has a policy where they will not, generally, they will not approve just one of the permits on their own. They want to review both permits concurrently and then issue them simultaneously. So there was a long deliberate process back and forth with DEP last year. Obviously, the engineer at the time is no longer, at the time when the permit was submitted, is no longer the engineer. Our office stepped in January and tried to get up to speed as quickly as possible with where things stood with this project. And DEP confirmed to us last summer that there never was a Water Quality Management Part 2 permit submitted to their office for review. So, our office banks and obtained all of the records. We did a file search at DEP's office in Pittsburgh and obtained all of the files that DEP has on the Mingo Circle project, everything from the planning and the permitting, and tried to kind of get a feel for where things were. And it became pretty clear that, they had some preliminary concepts in mind at the time for a gravity collection system to serve 104 homes and a number of houses that were going to be on grinder pumps. And then they were going to construct a wastewater treatment plant that would have discharged to Froman Run down somewhere along Garvin Road. But our office has not been provided. I know the township has asked for all of the files from the engineer at the time. I don't believe the township ever received those documents. And certainly our office, Bankson, has not seen any paperwork at all to show that there was a design in progress or a permit application made for an actual sewage treatment plant. So that's kind of where the project is at this point. The township did get some grant money back in November of 2020.
How much?
They received $500,000 from Washington County LSA. I believe that grant agreement was signed by the township in December of 2025, or December of 2020 for $500,000.
Where's that money at?
It has not been utilized yet. That money's
still have it?
That money's still available, and it's intended for the construction of the
Is
project.
there a time limit on that money?
Back in 2019, when the engineer completed the planning process, the cost estimate at the time was, I forget the exact number, but it was
2.7 million.
in that vicinity, in that ballpark. So obviously 500,000 was a small component of that much larger and more expensive project. When the township had done their planning process and figured on their cost estimates, they had assumed they would use that $500,000 towards the construction of the project, and they also assumed that they would collect a tapping fee of $4,500 from all of the 104 residents, which would generate approximately $500,000. The rest of the money then was planned to be borrowed from one of the typical funding agencies that's available for a municipal project of this size, whether that be RUS or whether that be Penvest. And when the engineer did calculations to estimate the monthly user cost back in 2019 for the wastewater treatment plant project and the collection system, the estimated monthly user cost was gonna be $126 per household per month, on top of the $4,500 tap-in fee that the homeowner would have to buy and pay the township, and the cost of installing the lateral, and potentially the grinder pump, if the residence was to be served by a grinder pump. So, generally these funding agencies will make some determination as to what is considered an affordable sewage bill, and in my experience, $126 sewage bill would be considerably higher than what Penvest would consider to be affordable at that time. Obviously, all of those figures were 2019 cost estimates. We've had significant global events that have impacted supply chains, and construction costs have increased considerably since that time. Bankson earlier this year updated those project cost estimates, and they're expensive projects, and the estimated monthly user cost is considerable unless there's sizable grant money that's awarded to the township to assist with this project. So certainly the failure rate of the residences, those 104 houses is a very important component of determining the need for this project overall, as is the overall project cost.
What he's trying to say is the reason why you do the dye test. And I tried to explain this before. I'm not against the sewage, but when you go through, when you start the process, you'll do a design or whatever, but then it has to go, DEP has to go through a process, and they do what they call a rating. The more malfunctioning systems you have, at least from my experience, the higher rating you have,
More likely to get money.
Okay, but.
Now, do you make those people correct that system if you do those dye tests?
that's the question we'll have to address. But right now, what I'm saying is, if you do the dye test, it will determine your ranking, and the higher ranking you have in terms of DEP, the more likely you're gonna get grant money.
I understand, but what happens if they fail? And I guarantee you, I live on Mingo Church Road. I bet you at least 50–60% will fail with the tests they do, all right? And so what happens then? Do you make all those people put in systems or holding tanks? $1,000 a month a pump or something?
We'll have to address that at the time.
Yeah.
What I'm saying.
But you're opening a can of worms.
But no,
It is,
But
it
let me
is catch-22, you don't test and you don't get funding, you test and you become Big Brother. It's a really,
Mrs. Colby, do you remember the El Remo sewage system down there? I was the one who was pretty much the architect in terms of finance. In that situation, there was $1,000 tap fee. I think, were you guys, I think you were, no, you weren't. $1,000 tap fee.
$64
$64.
$62
And I knew what to do in order to get the grant money. So I'm trying to make this thing move. If it's doable, we need to go and get the best bang to get grant money. Because the more grant money you get,
Right,
the less
The less
you're
we're gonna be
using
paying.
it. So that's what I've been trying to tell
okay,
you.
is there any other grant money? Now
Let
that,
me explain to you. Now you asked that question. So what you normally do when you start this process, you're supposed to have a joint meeting with RUS, Rural Utility Systems. Tammy knows the same thing. Rural Utility Systems and also Penvest. You have a joint meeting. And what they do is they look at your figures and they'll say, Penvest will say, you do it RUS, and RUS will say, you do it Penvest. Because they have different grant monies. I mean, they look at different circumstances, like you need more grant.
okay, but the fact that you have a consent order, and it states that a permanent resolution must be made or whatever. Doesn't that have any weight?
Well, there was a letter from the attorney, Gary Sweat. You've seen the letter?
Yeah.
What does it say, TJ? Do you have it there in front of you?
But doesn't that carry any weight as far as
Well,
the
here-
need or the how, you know what I'm saying, that doesn't that carry any weight, is we need to have this done
TJ,
as a township?
okay, TJ, you went to the meeting, we had a meeting with DEP.
That's right,
And what did they-
October of 2023, yes.
When we met with DEP about the system, what did they tell you about the records and all that, the concerns about this?
They had some concerns with the project costs and the overall level of need. Right, that's my recollection.
That's my recollection too. But
The solicitor's recollection.
So what we're trying to say is, if we're gonna do the sewage project, we're gonna have to do it the right way to get the money. Like I said, if you look at, again,
We're not denying the need, but they want us to prove the need. You know, it's not like we're not saying we don't need it.
and when you say I'm
We're not
fixated,
saying we don't
and when
want
you say
it.
I'm fixated on the, first of all, I take direction from the full board, and that letter was the direction of the board. In terms of what we need to do. We're not trying to make this project not go, but we want to make sure that we get the most bang for the buck. I mean, you understand that?
Yes, I understand,
No, you
but
don't.
I'm just wondering, isn't there, other than through Penvest and, I mean,
I did a project in Canton Township in Malone Ridge. We went for a bond issue, but that's when the interest rates were extremely low. So when we did Malone Ridge in Canton Township, which is a multi-million-dollar project. Okay.
I
I'm
understand the
saying, but
bond.
not for her. but
All
I'm
right,
just
so
saying in
a
general,
bond,
like,
so we floated a bond, we went and got, it's like getting a loan from a bank. We call it a bond. And so we received a bond and paid, back then interest rates were next to nothing. So we received a bond and it was due. So that's the other, right now, interest rates are sky high. I can't go in that direction.
And
I'm just wondering with, with all the government things that are going on now, like, judging
Excuse me?
with,
The
infrastructure stuff, isn't there
build back,
something
build
else?
better or
The
something.
federal, as my understanding, the federal infrastructure money that's been made available to the state of Pennsylvania has been allocated to Penvest. That money.
But isn't there more then?
There's
than
more
there
money
used to be?
in Penvest available than ever.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
But then you have, again, when you do funding, he'll tell you, it's like, I think it's 3 cycles rather than 4 cycles.
Yeah.
You try to figure out which cycle you can go, because the more people you have, the more
Competing.
entities that you have applying for
Okay, you're
sewage.
competing for that.
You compete, so what you try to figure out, what I would do when I used to know everybody in Penvest, like Larry Gasparotto, he would tell me, you got so many applying this cycle, so many applying this cycle, and if you have less people applying in that cycle,
You have a better
better
chance.
chance. So there's all these different nuances. Okay, I'm not trying to be difficult.
No,
And the
I'm
big-
following you,
The
I
big
get it.
kick-
You know.
big kicker with Penvest, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but to finalize a funding offer with Penvest, you have to have all of your environmental permits in hand, and that's not the case at this time.
So the environmental permits were,
You have to have all of your permits.
so what permits do we get?
NPDS, the water quality management part of
Were
it.
those ever done prior to,
The NPDS was submitted in July of 22 and approved December of 23, and DEP confirmed that there was never a water quality management part 2 permit.
that's in order to move forward?
That permit needs to be issued for the township to be
So
able to go to
what does that take?
It takes a complete design of the wastewater treatment plant, and it takes probably at least a 9-month review process. It's a lengthy permit.
I'm not an engineer.
It seems to me that someone has to look at a design that's feasible, and then push it across those through. I mean, yeah,
And
and
then
then we know it's gonna take time.
Let me explain to you one thing. This thing started, the consent order, I think, was in 2018.
That's right.
17.
January,
17.
January 15th, 2018.
Was there anything done, you look at the records that we have, is anything done between that and 2023?
Well, they
That they
completed,
just addressed it from
they
the
completed the 537 process. That was done in 2019, approved in January 2020.
Is anything done after that?
They did the sewage facilities planning module. That was in 2020 and 2021, and then the first, the permit that we keep talking about was applied for in 2022.
Now, the original 537 done by Senate Engineering at the time, they, if I read it correctly, they had multiple places where they said the only feasible option is lift station at Pixie. And then it was reworked by the township's engineer to add one more option, which was this. And then,
The treatment plant.
and then Senate Engineering wanted to get their grant money released from the LSA. And said that although we're aware that you had your engineer add one more option, that they believe that at least 80% of the work was done by them, and they won their money released. Now, their opinion was the only viable option was lift station Pixie. There was recently, and I know, as you guys know, you're not in their service area, right? That has always been an issue, is that you're not in their service area. But just recently, Peters Creek is looking at the option to take property on Roots Road for development. And they're reaching out to all of their municipalities that participate in Peters Creek to see if they would, if they vote unanimously that they'll take the sewage outside of their service area, they're willing to take that that. And if that happens, we're hoping to circle back and say, well, if you do it for developers, why won't you do it for our residents? You know, our residents need it. You know, like if, in that particular piece of property that they're developing is, am I correct, like 75 or 80% into the service area, but there's an additional.
Well, 75% has to be in the service area.
So 75% of theirs is in the service area, but there is portions of it that's not, and so they reached out. So we made a board vote that we were okay with that, hoping that all the other communities within PCSA would be okay with that, and that might open the door to taking storage outside the service area. If we can get it to their service area by lift station, will they take it?
Let me ask you this question, if there's a.
And that was one of the options that Senate engineers, that was the only option that Senate engineering thought was feasible.
If there was a lift station, would there be as many grinder pumps if there was a lift station?
There'd be considerably less.
'Cause in this
There
project-
would not be grinder pumps. The Senate options looked at serving 47 houses. The Harshman option looked at serving 104 houses. With many of those
There
additional.
were two lift station options. One lift station would take care of all of the existing, another one would be an option for development in that area.
The Senate option requires 2 lift stations,
But no grinder pumps.
no grinder pumps.
And
Not
that's
that-
about 10,000 a home that needs a grinder pump?
Yeah, that's a budget number, yeah.
Could you explain to, I know my experience, because I've done these before, could you explain your experience as an engineer regarding grinder pumps?
They're difficult, they're problematic. They're another mechanical piece of the system.
And they're.
They require operation, they require maintenance. There's electrical costs associated with the property owner. There's life cycle costs that are worth considering.
You're buying a key and putting
So,
it in your front yard.
Literally.
At Peters Creek extend their coverage area
And
to
they-
make a circle, the cost will go like this.
And they
Right.
they don't have to by their bylaws, they don't
Well,
have
I don't
to.
know, call
But-
from and borrow a lot of.
Well, they don't, they have.
You know, you put
you
some
can't-
vertical
you
pressure
can't-
on
You
them.
can't fight an authority, they don't have to, you can work with them.
Well,
I
we'll
think
work
it,
with
and
them.
I think it was at one time, I believe that they were amicable to do that.
I
And
think
then
they
there was
will
a
be.
litigation that Union Township brought them to court, so we couldn't go out Ring Road. We brought them to court, and we cost them almost $500,000 in that litigation. And then it got to be a very tenacious atmosphere between Union Township and the Peters Creek, and we're trying to amend that. And we're hopeful the fact that they're even considering outside their service area in that Nottingham area.
So
Because
what,
that's hopeful for us that,
so what I'm trying to say is when you have, from my experience, what I've been told by different engineering firms, and I deal with banks in different places. You try to stay away from grinder pumps, because the more moving parts you have, the more problems you have. So, am I right or wrong?
Absolutely, most of the system could be gravity fed to a central location, then lifted from there.
And the problem with the grinder pump, like your wife said, that whole fixing a septic is costly. Tap fee, grinder pump fee, I mean, you're gonna save $20,000, you're gonna tap into storage, and then you're gonna have a debt service to pay. And it's like, they'll go, well, I don't want it,
We don't
because
want that, right.
yeah, so that's,
Nobody wants that.
Then if you have a power outage and you have a grinder pump, what happens?
Oh, we have a lot of power
and
outages.
the grinder pump's gonna
I
be
have less
another
than
$10,000.
power on speed dial.
How long does the average grinder pump last?
So,
So in 10 years, you have another $10,000.
10 years go by my
Another
own.
grinder pump.
We don't want that.
so that's, so it's sort of like, we have a lot of questions that we need to answer.
Got one grinder pump.
And our documentation in 2022, or beginning of 2023, was all about 3 properties. That's all we knew about was 3 properties. Everything that we found had to do with 3 properties. We answered the DEP about the consent order dealing with those 3 properties, because that's all we knew about. And then this board came in, we, went through all of the documentation and every question that you had brought up, and the timeline went through. Tried to get another meeting with the DEP, but I don't think they were, they don't want to meet. So, then we're looking at the options of how do we show the need without becoming big brother and like dye testing people. So how do you prove to them we need money, we need storage, we need money without dye testing people and putting them in a position?
Well, you can add my
where
property
they
to the
fail?
list as a need.
Pardon?
You can add my property to the list as a need.
Well, they want us to do basically a survey of the area, show a need, which would mean dye testing.
Well, I'm sure I'm not the only home that's on a holding tank at the moment.
No, not at all.
Well, that's the thing, everybody that's on a holding tank is in dire need.
And they're well aware of all the numbers of the holding tanks because they're registered with the DEP. They want more.
I have one quick question, because I know the board, I wouldn't want your job up there, I've come to these meetings for years. But a real quick question, everybody refers to this consent decree, okay, what exactly does it say? Because you have to belong to the soils co-op, their testing is so rigid, it's unbelievable. Or can you be like the other rural townships around here who don't? They say it's between buyer and seller. Have a plumber come and dye test to do it. They don't run thousands of gallons of water and walk 4 miles down the stream to see if they can find dye, okay? They're rigid, they're testing. Now, do you have to do that as a short-term thing? Because you already have at least 3 houses that I know that can't be sold. Or they were sold illegally, one on Route 88, okay? So, why don't we come to a short-term solution, and then the long-term, I agree, work it out, see what we can do and raise the money, and we're gonna have to get sewage. But in the meantime, why penalize every person who tries to sell their home? Most of them are older, and they can't sell their houses.
And I did, when you had mentioned that, when you came to my business and mentioned that, I did bring it to him and say, could you get some more information for the board about what he's talking about? I was, I didn't use the word in there, but ignorant to what you were saying. I said, I'd like to know more about what Mr. Van Doris is saying here. Can you get me some more information for the board so we can look at that option? So I did bring it to him to get, I just don't know enough about what you were talking about.
TJ, what the current place we are, say, and again, I'm not, just trying to give you some ideas, I'm not saying, I'm just trying to give you some ideas. So, right now, and again, I've dealt with banks since the first Sewage project back in 1980, some,
And I'll tell
87,
you, the
88.
DEP talked highly, they're like, we're glad to see you guys got banks, I mean,
That's
they
who taught
talk
me.
highly. And we pick banks in engineering because that's their thing, it's water and sewage, like, we pick them because that's their strong suit.
And that's who, and that's, I've dealt with them since the late 1980s, my first Sewage. With what I know, what you know, with the current situation regarding this plan, how long, can you give them some idea of like, what it take, what it would take to start design, how long that would take,
Yeah,
how long it takes to
Question?
funding?
yeah, I mean, assuming we were authorized to design a treatment plant, you know, we have no files on a treatment design, so there's nothing to pick up and continue with at this point, nothing that I'm familiar with. So starting a new sewage treatment plant design from scratch, you're probably looking 9 months maybe.
But what would
to
be better,
design.
sewage plant or going to Pixie Creek?
I mean, definitely conveyance to an existing authority would be the preferred approach, I would think. Assuming the costs are comparable, but, you know, to do it, the issue is now that if you were to deviate back to the pumping to Peters Creek, we would need to amend the 537 plan again, because that's not the recommended alternative at this point. So you have the planning step, you have the permitting step, and you have the construction.
Would you still need your SPUS permit and the other permit if you're going to that way?
Yes. You need both those permits, whether you're doing a pump station or yeah.
And I don't wanna say rude, but we have so many agenda items that.
Yeah, there is.
We have a workshop with security storage to the.
Real quick, he didn't answer that question. Do you have to use the soils co-op to do the testing? Or can you say, no, the township, anybody who does it, a plumber, whatever, are you mandated to use them?
When you say social, are you talking about the sewage company?
Yes, yes, the soils co-op, whatever it's called.
Washington County Sewage Company.
Yes.
So we have they have our DEP, delegation agreement. So to opt out of that, I think it's a 12-month to, I'm pretty sure our deal with that is a 12 or 16-month opt-out if we just consider it.
We have our, I don't know.
I,
Mr. Cassidy, you work.
I'd just like to hear that because other rural townships don't have it and it's between the buyer and seller. I don't think you should be enforcing the DEP rules for them
and we.
as a local government.
We gave that delegation to Washington County Storage Council back in the 70s.
What he's referring to is Green County. There's no soil cooperation. At each township, it's its own SUA.
No, Nottingham Township doesn't do testing through them, neither does Somerset.
But I'm saying, but you're saying rural, but I'm saying I represent more than half of Green County. Each township and borough selects its own SEO to
Storage enforcement.
sewage
Okay.
enforcement officer. When you said rural, that's what it's referring to.
Okay.
Green County. Every place down there, they don't have a cooperative.
But they still have an SEO,
They
storage
still have a
enforcement
sewage
officer, so it just would lead Washington County Storage Council into a different person, but it still do the same.
And they all use Tim Mill down in Green County.
So that it still would be a person, you don't opt out of just not doing it, you're just using.
Well, they do unless they changed it recently. Nottingham, it's between the buyer and seller.
I don't know, I mean, I
Yes.
know that actually.
Yes,
Okay, I guess we.
okay, that's
all right.
good.
But answer all your questions satisfactorily.
Yes.